Some plants don't just grow in your garden, they literally take over. Invasive plants can be especially frustrating because when you first see them, they look completely harmless. But once they escape into natural areas, they can spread aggressively, outcompete native vegetation, and change the ecosystems around them. Today we're looking at 3 invasive plants, how to recognize them, why they're a problem, and what you can do to control them before they spread further. And there's one important thing to understand before we start. Removing an invasive plant once doesn't necessarily mean that you've truly gotten rid of it. Successful control is about removing the plant, preventing it from reproducing or spreading, and then monitoring the area for regrowth. Okay, so here's the list. Let's start out with some of those invasive species that you may recognize immediately. English ivy is one of those plants that looks beautiful when you first see it. It's evergreen, it grows quickly, and it can create that nice woodland garden that we all like. The problem is when it escapes the garden. English ivy can spread across the ground and climb trees and shrubs. In British Columbia, it's considered an invasive plant because it can displace native vegetation and interfere with the structural and health of trees. One of the easiest ways to identify it is by its familiar lobed leaves on juvenile growth and its vigorous trailing and climbing stems. Once established, ivy can form dense mats across the forest floor. And then when it climbs trees, it can be particularly challenging to manage it. So how do you control it? The first step is to stop it from climbing further. If the ivy is growing up a tree, cut all vines around the trunk at chest height and ground level, removing a 1 to 2 foot section of each vine. Do not pull high vines off the bark. Let the upper ivy die and fall off naturally over time. You want to avoid damaging the tree's bark. Once the climbing connection has been broken, you can concentrate on the ivy growing at ground level. For smaller infestations, physically removing the vines and roots can be effective, but you have to be thorough. Any pieces left over capable of regrowing can become a new problem. And this is where patience becomes really effective. You have to keep going back to that problem area and check again. If you see new shoots appearing, remove them before the plant has a chance to become established again. Once you've removed the ivy, don't leave the vines in a pile on bare soil or add them to your regular compost pile. Fresh ivy stems can survive and potentially root again if the conditions are right. Instead, gather all of the vines and roots carefully and contain them in a sturdy yard waste bag or another appropriate container. Keep the material contained until you can dispose of it according to your municipal or local invasive species guideline. If your local waste facility accepts invasive plant material, that's usually a much safer option than putting it in your home compost. And never dump ivy in a forest, roadside, park, or other natural area, even if it looks completely dried out. And then come back and check regularly for new shoots. Removing the visible vines is the first step, and then going back and monitoring is key so that no new growth can come back. Japanese knotweed is a plant that looks fairly ordinary at first, but it can be one of the most difficult plants to control. It grows quickly and can form dense stands that crowd out other vegetation. It's particularly common in disturbed areas along roadsides, riverbanks, and other places where it has an opportunity to spread. One of the easiest ways to recognize it is by its tall, hollow, bamboo-like stems and its broad, heart or shield-shaped leaves. In late summer, it produces clusters of small, creamy white flowers. But the most important thing to understand about Japanese knotweed isn't actually what you see above ground. It's what's happening below ground. Japanese knotweed spreads through an extensive underground system of stems called rhizomes. These rhizomes can produce new shoots, allowing the plant to regenerate even after the visible stems have been removed. And this is why simply just cutting it down will never solve the problem. Even very small pieces of viable rhizome or stem can potentially produce new plants under suitable conditions. So, how do you control it? The approach truly depends on how bad the infestation really is. For a very small infestation, the goal is to remove as much of the rhizome as possible. Carefully dig around the plant and remove the roots and underground rhizomes, checking the surrounding soil for additional pieces. This works best when the plant is young and the infestation is small. For larger infestations, digging everything out can actually make the situation worse if pieces of rhizome are accidentally left behind or moved to another part of the garden. Instead, one of the options is to just continuously cut any new shoot that appears in the garden. The idea is to keep removing the plant's above ground growth before it can develop a strong canopy and replenish its underground reserves. This isn't a one-time job. You may need to repeat the process throughout the growing season and continue monitoring the area in the following years. Another option for some sites is smothering it. After cutting the stems down, the area can be covered with a heavy-duty, light-blocking material and secured firmly around the edges. The goal here is to starve it from sunlight. This method requires patience because the Japanese knotweed can remain dormant and push against barriers, so the area needs to be monitored regularly and cover kept intact. For particularly persistent infestations, there is also herbicide-based control programs, but these require the correct product, timing, application method, and compliance with local regulations. They shouldn't be treated as a quick fix, especially near waterways or areas where other plants could be affected. Whichever method you use, there is one rule you simply cannot ignore. Don't spread the plant while you're trying to remove it. Never put Japanese knotweed cuttings or rhizomes into your home compost, and don't move potentially contaminated soil around your property. Keep all the plant material contained and disposed of according to your local municipal guidelines. And if you're enjoying these tips, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, where we're producing videos like these once a week, right here on our YouTube channel. Our third and probably most invasive to BC is Scotch Broom. Scotch Broom is very easy to recognize because of its yellow pea-shaped flowers. It's a woody shrub with rigid green 5-angled stems, and it can grow roughly 1 to 3 meters tall. It thrives particularly well in sunny, disturbed areas, and that's important because disturbance creates opportunities. Open ground, roadsides, recently cleared areas, and places where vegetation has been removed can become ideal location for Scotch Broom to establish. And once established, it can form dense stands that compete out any of the natural vegetation. But Scotch Broom can also change the conditions beneath it. Its deep root system allows it to access water and nutrients deep in the soil, while the plant's nitrogen-rich leaves and branches add nutrients as they decompose. This can alter soil chemistry and in some conditions change the soil acidity. These changes can make it more difficult for some native plants to re-establish after Scotch Broom has taken over. And there's another reason why Scotch Broom can be particularly hard to eradicate. It develops a large, extensive root system that can regrow deep into the soil, making established plants much harder to remove completely. Additionally, Scotch Broom can be particularly difficult to eradicate because its seeds remain viable in the soil for decades. The Invasive Species Council of British Columbia notes that seeds can survive up to 30 years. So even if you remove the mature shrubs, you may be seeing seedlings pop up for the next 30 years. So, how do you control it? The good news is that the strategy is somewhat different from Japanese knotweed, because the Scotch Broom's biggest advantage is its ability to produce and spread large numbers of seeds. For small plants, the simplest option is to remove them while they're still young. If the soil is loose enough, try to pull the entire plant, including the main root. This is much easier before the plant becomes a large woody shrub. For larger plants, you can cut the shrub close to the ground. However, cutting it doesn't necessarily mean the plant is gone. Scotch Broom can sometimes re-sprout, so keep watching the stump and surrounding area for new growth. The most important timing, of course, to chop these things down is before they produce mature seeds. If you're removing flowering Scotch Broom, don't leave the cut branches lying around until the seed pods mature. Collect the material and dispose of it properly. And here's where long-term monitoring is especially important. Even after you've removed every visible Scotch Broom plant, new seedlings may continue appearing because the seeds can remain viable in the soil for many years. So whenever you remove an established patch, keep checking the area during the following growing seasons. Small seedlings are much easier to remove than a mature shrub. And there's one more thing that can make a huge difference. Don't leave large area bare soil after removal. When Scotch Broom is removed, encourage desirable vegetation to take its place. Ground covers, native plants, grasses, or other well-behaved plants can occupy that growing space and make it harder for new seedlings to become established. And this is where all three of these invasive species we've talked about have in common. Prevention is a lot easier to manage than a full-on infestation. That means paying attention to what you're bringing to the garden and being careful about how you dispose of garden waste. Don't dump unwanted plants, soil, or garden debris into natural areas. And be particularly careful when removing soil from a contaminated space to another area. And if you're working in an area where invasive plants are present, clean your tools, boots, and equipment before moving onto another part of your property. You don't want to accidentally transport seeds or plant fragments from one area of your garden to the other. And remember, not every unfamiliar plant is an invasive species. Before removing something you're unsure about, take a photo, compare it with a reliable identification guide, or contact your local invasive species organization. And now, once you've dug up those invasive species, be sure to come in store and check out our selection at Wildwood Outdoor Living. to replace it with something beautiful. Or go online at wildwoodexpress.com and pre-order your perennials, available now online. The important thing to remember is that invasive plant control isn't usually about one dramatic afternoon of gardening. It's about early identification, careful removal, preventing spread, and monitoring what happens afterwards. The earlier you deal with the invasive spread, the easier it is to manage. If you have an invasive plant taking over your garden right now, let us know in the comments below. It could be one of bindweed, nightshade, creeping buttercup, you name it, it's around. You may even help another gardener recognize the plant. And don't forget to subscribe to Wildwood Outdoor Living for more practical gardening advice.